Oregon's premier public affairs forum. I'm Jim ZEHREN, president of City Club, and I welcome you all, those of you here at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB radio and watching on cable television. We're glad you are here with us today, this Friday, the 26th of September, 2008. Today's program will feature a moderated debate between the two major party candidates for the office of Oregon State Treasurer, Republican Alley and Democrat Ben Westlund. But first, I want to thank our Friday Forum corporate sponsors, without whose generous financial support these important and time-honored City Club political debates would not be possible. This quarter's Friday Forum corporate sponsors are Neil Kelly Company, City Center Parking, West Coast Bank, and the law firm of Stoll Reeves LLP. We thank them all for their support. Now, before I introduce our moderator and we begin our debate, I want to remind us all that the mission of City Club, paraphrased, is a twofold one. First, to inform our members and our community regarding public issues, and second, to mobilize our members and the community to become involved in those issues as citizens. Now, I mention this because we cannot achieve City Club's mission if we are not open to information and views and arguments and even messengers that are different from our predisposed personal opinions and preferences. As such, I ask that all in the room here at the Governor Hotel remain courteous and respectful and open to all information conveyed and all views expressed by both candidates during today's debate, even if you arrived here today favoring one of the candidates, even if you disagree with what you hear during the debate today. Because by doing this, you will help further the kind of civil discourse of public issues that City Club stands for, and we will all honor our guest debaters, our own process, and the public interest of our broader community. And now to introduce our moderator, who will introduce the two candidates and review the format for and rules of conduct of the debate. Our moderator is a professor of political science at Lewis and Clark College here in Portland. He teaches a variety of courses in American politics, including U.S. government, public opinion, and political parties. He is the author of the book, The Evolution of Political Polling. And his current research includes work on media bias, military media relations in the 2003 Iraq War, citizens' reactions to political scandals, political non-apologies, and cross-national differences in newspaper photographs of politicians. The life of the academic. It sounds wonderful. Our moderator is also a new political analyst for OPB Radio, joining Bill Lunch in that capacity. Please give a warm welcome to our debate moderator, a City Club member, I'm pleased to say, Professor Robert Eisinger.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, City Club. My apologies to City Club members that I'm looking towards the podium and not you. I am the bald spot at the center of the room. I was given 60 seconds to speak and provide my own remarks. I will be brief. The only thing I will say is please turn off your cell phones, and I thank you for that. This debate will have several sections. First, each candidate will give a 3-minute opening statement. A coin toss determined the order of the appearance in this debate. Our timekeeper today is Joe Sixta. Following the opening statements, candidates will respond to questions suggested in advance of this meeting by City Club's Friday Forum Committee. These are the only questions that will be asked today. There will be no questions from the floor. We will rely on the judgment of our distinguished panel of City Club members seated at a table to my right to decide whether the questions have indeed been answered by the candidates. If 2 or more of these members raise their cards, indicating that they feel a question has not been answered, I will restate the question and ask the candidate to reply again. On our panel, we have John Leeper, Leslie Moorhead, and Steve Novick. Following the City Club's questions, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask 3 questions of the other candidate. After the rotation of candidate questions, each candidate will make a 3-minute closing statement. Please be respectful of the candidates and please hold all applause until the end of the program. And now the introduction of the candidates. Alan Alley is the Republican candidate for Oregon State Treasurer. For the past 30 years, Alan Alley's experience, which includes co-founding the semiconductor company Pixelworks, has spanned engineering, marketing, venture capital, entrepreneurship, and public service. In January 2007, Governor Ted Kalingoski appointed Alan as his Deputy Chief of Staff, responsible for overseeing the policy areas of economic development, technology, transportation, workforce training, and energy. In 2006, Alan was named as chairman of the Oregon Business Plan, a statewide effort to shape public policy in Oregon and to promote economic growth. Alan currently serves on the board of the Mechanical Engineering Industrial Advisory Council at Purdue University. He also served as the chair of the Oregon Councils of the AEA, the state's largest trade group for the high technology industry. State Senator Ben Westlund is the Democratic candidate for Oregon State Treasurer. In 1974, Mr. Westlund moved to Central Oregon and co-founded the company American Fossil, which made non-toxic substances from crushed marine fossils. After selling the company and creating an international animal husbandry business selling bovine genetics, he retired from the private sector in 1994 and began a career in public service. He was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives as a Republican in 1996 and later served as co-chair of the Joint Ways and Means Committee. In 2003, he was appointed to serve out the term of Senator Bev Clarno, representing District 27, which covers most of Deschutes County and includes the city of Bend. He was elected to that seat in 2004, and in 2006 changed his registration to Independent and then to Democrat. Westlund also serves on the board of the Oregon Cultural Trust, a public-private partnership designed to expand Oregon's economy through investment in the arts. Will the candidates please take their podiums? Mr. Alley, please begin with your opening statement.
First of all, I'd like to thank the City Club for this debate. With the massive tectonic dislocations of our financial markets, Oregonians are now poised to select someone to lead the management of the single largest asset in our state, our $60 billion plus investment funds. I think what was viewed as a down-ballot curiosity has become one of the most important statewide races this year. The race is critical to us today. It will also be critical to our children and maybe even our grandchildren. Reiterating a little bit about my background, I'm a mechanical engineer. I worked for Ford, I worked for Boeing. I helped develop the computer graphics industry dating back into the 1980s. In 1986, I began investing in high technology companies. My venture firm was a Boston-based venture firm. We viewed ourselves as Yankee investors. We identified markets, people, technologies, and combined them with our capital and our experience. We made money the old-fashioned way. We earned it. We earned it during the crash of '87. We earned it during the bubble of 2000. In 1988, I helped the founders of a company here in Oregon called Infocus Systems fund their company and grow it to $250 million in annual sales, co-founded a semiconductor company in 1997 that we grew to $1 billion of sales in 11 years. And finally, as mentioned, I worked for Governor Kalingoski for about 14 months. It was actually one of the best experiences of my life as a Republican working in a Democratic office. And although Governor Kalingoski has endorsed my opponent, I have to say I wouldn't be standing here before you if it wasn't for his help. The governor and Chip and Tim always allowed me in every one of the strategy and policy meetings. It wasn't like there was a little Republicans table and then the big kids table. I got to sit at the big kids table with Dad. And my time in the governor's office showed me that somebody with private sector experience could have a huge positive effect in Salem. That when we'd be looking at a solution like this, I was able to say, what if we did this or what if we did this? And it wasn't that my solutions were the ones that everybody took, but it just opened up a wide spectrum of solutions that wouldn't have been discussed before. I saw that I had a positive effect when I was in Salem. I'd like to go back and do that in the Treasury. I think now is the time to do that. And with your blessing and your help, and most importantly, your vote, I'll be able to do that. Thank you very much.
Senator Westlund, your opening statement.
Thank you. And I too echo the gratitude of the candidates for putting on this wonderful function and forum. You know, Oregon was not built on fear, but on courage, on imagination, and the unbeatable determination to do the job at hand. Bob Straub, one of Oregon's great treasurers, said that. Those words remind me of our past, our state's pioneering spirit, and of our potential. They remind us that as a people, we are independent, innovative, and inspired. Each of us has hopes and dreams for our future, but day-to-day concerns too often get in the way of investing in ourselves and bringing those dreams to reality. We lay awake at night with concerns for our families, their health, and our homes. Our state has similar concerns. Like us, our state has bills to pay. It has a credit rating. It's the job of the state treasurer to see that bigger picture, to see that long-term vision doesn't get lost in the small details of the day. Right now is the time in our history when we must decide if Oregon is to be an economic follower or leader. With the right priorities, the state treasurer can help. As state treasurer, I will continue Oregon's tradition of wise investments, of saving tax dollars for our state. I will invest in our people by expanding the college savings plan and increasing vocational and technical training to more students. I will work to expand financial literacy to help people make sound choices to save for a home or retirement. I will advocate for local and sustainable business models to build a more environmentally and fiscally sustainable economy. I will look at creative ways we can invest and repair our long-neglected infrastructure. As state treasurer, I will promote investments in renewable energy to reduce our dependency on foreign oil, lower energy costs, and create Oregon jobs. The state treasurer is a steward of Oregon's financial future, one who must put the vision of tomorrow ahead of the problems of today. You know, for every Oregonian whose life can be improved by saving for college, retirement, or growing a new financial skill, the treasurer can help. For every entrepreneur that looks to the state for financial strength in our troubled global economy, the treasurer can help. Like the student planning for college, the senior concerned about retirement, the business owner concerned about the balance sheet, the future lies ahead, unknown. You know, my mother passed away a year ago, and one of the values she left me was that having the courage to face the unknown prepares us for the future. And if we can find that strength, in the words of Bob Straub, Oregon was not built on fear but courage, then we can find the strength. We can get through this together. As your next treasurer, I will help.
We will now move to the portion of the program where I will ask the questions prepared in advance by City Club of Portland's Friday Forum Committee. The candidate to whom the question is directed will have 60 seconds to respond to the question. Following each answer, the opposing candidate will have the option of a 45-second rebuttal. The candidates have not seen these questions in advance. The first question goes to Mr. Alley. The Oregon College Savings Plan has grown since it was created under current State Treasurer Randall Edwards. But the program doesn't allow parents to prepay tuition at Oregon schools as programs in many other states do. With soaring tuition costs, what's wrong with allowing tuition prepayment to help make higher education more affordable for Oregon families?
I think tuition prepayment as part of the Oregon College Savings Plan would be a good idea, actually. I think anything that we can do to provide a launching pad for children is absolutely essential. The Oregon College Savings Plan also could be enhanced in other ways of getting more money into that college savings plan. One of the things that we talked about when I was in the governor's office was raising the corporate minimum tax. One of the ideas that was floated was actually taking some of that corporate minimum tax and putting it into the savings plan, finding a mechanism to put it into the savings plan to help provide an underpinning for those people that are providing for those educations.
Senator Westlund, you have the option of a 45-second response.
Well, just briefly, I was in the legislature, and as was current Treasurer Randall Edwards, when we created the rainy day fund, the college savings plan. It was certainly then Representative Edwards' signature bill, but it certainly was the work of many hands, and I feel some parentage to that great effort. Not only did the bill pass the legislature, but it has been under excellent stewardship from our current treasurer, and those assets have grown to over $1 billion. But I will tell you, there's still a gap population for middle-income Oregonians that can't afford college.
The next question for Senator Westlund. If you were to be elected on November 4th, you'll have just 2 months to prepare for the 2009 legislative session. Is a legislative agenda for the Treasurer's office necessary next year? And if so, what will it include if you're elected?
The short answer to the question is yes, I will have time to prepare because I've done this for 5 terms, after every election cycle. Legislative experience is incredibly important to being an effective treasurer. Every treasurer since 1965 has had long legislative experience, with one exception, Clay Myers, who was Secretary of State prior to his assuming the treasurer's role. It is incredibly important that the treasurer be able to affect legislative policy. Randall Edwards helped get the rainy day fund through last session. Couldn't have done that without his years of experience in the legislature. Passing legislation to lower energy costs, to improve the quality of our education system. Passing legislation that impacts the state's ability to borrow to help schools. It's a critical legislative position.
Mr. Alley, you have 45 seconds to respond if you wish.
This is something that I think Ben and I see very differently. I don't see this as a legislative job. I see it as an executive job. And from what I've done and the research that I've done, we have a lot of executive priorities for the fund. We've lost $6 to $8 billion in the PERS fund alone over the last year. We have a structure of that fund that we have to look at. We have to look at how those investments are going to be made. Those aren't legislative priorities. I think that has to be the focus of the treasurer. And in all the work that I've done so far, I haven't seen a list of legislative priorities that I would have to implement between November 1st and the 1st of the year.
This question for Mr. Alley. You've worked as Governor Kalingoski's Deputy Chief of Staff and have served on several state boards and commissions. Yet the governor endorsed your opponent in this race. It could be that his endorsement was just a matter of partisan politics, or that there are substantive differences between you and the governor that voters should understand. How do you explain the governor's endorsement?
I would say it's politics, unfortunately. I had a great relationship with the governor and everybody in that office. I consider many of the people that I worked with in that office my friends, and I think people that worked with me in Salem, and some of them are sitting here, probably saw that we had a great working relationship, not only with the governor's office, but with the legislature as well. The other thing is, certainly did not see eye to eye on every single policy. We had differences of opinion. That's what made that job a great job, because we came to the table with respect for each other. We came to the table with our experience, compared those experiences, compared the positions that we had, and then from there we're able to create good policy from that.
Senator Westlund, a 45-second response if you wish.
Thank you. The job one for the treasurer is protecting and growing the hard-earned retirement dollars of our public employees in the Public Employee Retirement Fund. Prior to the governor endorsing me, we had long talks, not only about the sanctity of those dollars and the responsibility to nurture them for the benefit of our public employees. We also had discussions about policies on the land board. I can assure each and every one of you here that while partisan politics is certainly part and parcel to all of our lives, the governor's endorsement is based on capability, policy agreement, and a belief that I am the best candidate in this race.
Next question for Senator Westlund. Under the Fiscal Responsibility tab on your website, your first entry is the, quote, claim your lost money, unquote, link. A program that allows Oregonians to search for unclaimed property. Given the prominence you've given to this link, should we assume that promoting Claim Your Lost Money is your top priority for fiscal responsibility? If it isn't, what is?
Thank you for the question. Let me just say it is not my top priority, but it is part of the obligation for the office and the treasurer to serve all Oregonians. The Unclaimed Property Division takes in about $40 million a year and only returns $9 million. More than that, as your next state treasurer, it will be one of my priorities to petition the federal government to release to its proper owners the over $15 billion of unclaimed federal property, mostly College E savings bonds and war bonds, owed to the American people. That's $150 million into Oregon's pockets. While it's not a top priority, it is certainly a responsibility of the treasurer to make it easier and more convenient for people to claim what is rightfully theirs.
Mr. Alley, a 45-second response if you wish.
It's not my top priority. I can't answer that for Ben. My top priority, I think we do agree on this. You mentioned that return on investment for the PERS fund is the #1 priority for the treasurer. Return on investment and preserving those funds has to be your top priority.
A question for Mr. Alley. Oregon's current treasurer has been an outspoken advocate for issues that aren't directly related to his elected position, examples being school funding and Oregon's tax structure. Do you believe that you should speak out on issues that aren't directly related to the job of state treasurer? If so, what will you be promoting?
I guess my observation of what Randall's done has been actually germane to the office of the state treasurer. And what I would do is continue in that vein. I think one of the things that's key that maybe has been missing from the discussion is I believe we have a capital formation crisis here in the state, meaning the amount of capital that we have to grow and sustain business here in the state isn't sufficient for the opportunities that we have. And I think that's something that I can bring to this position with my background and experience, both in venture capital and in starting and growing companies. That's something that I think is essential. So being the chief steward or the chief economic development officer for capital formation in the state, I think is critical to the job.
Senator Westlund, you have the option to respond.
Thank you. The public policy aspect associated with the office is a critical component, certainly not the only component associated with this job. Your treasurers as a group control over $3 trillion in this economy. They have influence in clout in moderating, improving business practices on Wall Street and in the financial community. It is essential that treasurers band together with their monetary clout to help improve the sordid practices on Wall Street that has led us to this fiscal mess.
A question for Senator Westlund. Oregon's treasurer must be concerned about foregone revenues. While our tax system is characterized as progressive, it continues to forego a significant resource gain by taxing goods and services like hotel rooms, which primarily affect visitors rather than Oregonians themselves. In your view, is a sales tax a complete lost cause in Oregon, or is there a pathway to making a sales tax acceptable to Oregon voters?
If you ask the question about a sales tax or any consumption tax, VAT or sales, as just a tack-on tax, change nothing else, and just add that component, yes, I do believe it's lost. But I and a bipartisan group of legislators have worked tirelessly to craft a plan that does include a consumption tax, that does stabilize our revenues, does provide more money for the general fund, and gives every tax-paying Oregonian a tax cut. This is critical for Oregon's future, and it takes political courage to touch that third rail of Oregon politics and say, yes, I do support fiscal reform, I do support tax reform, I do support a consumption tax. But it's just not the tax. It's how we spend the money, appropriate it in ways and means, how we measure that appropriation and its effectiveness, and how we raise the revenue.
Mr. Alley, you have the option to respond.
I don't support a sales tax. I've had the benefit of living in many different states all around the country, and every state I've ever lived in believes their tax system is broken. Some believe that it's too weighted toward a sales tax, some believe that it's too weighted towards a property tax. I think there's pluses and minuses with every system. I think the huge hole that we have is we basically run state government without any cash. We run it without a shock absorber. We run it without a reserve fund. We have a small reserve fund now, about $700 million. Compared to the state government, that's a small amount of money. But I think what we have to do is increase reserves. I don't think it's trying to re-architect a whole new tax system.
Mr. Alley, the U.S. economy is foundering right now, and fingers of blame are being pointed in lots of directions. In your opinion, where does the blame belong, and which presidential candidate's economic plan is better targeted at turning our economy around, and why?
You might as well raise the question marks now. Thank you. Does that mean I get a minute 45 to answer?
I get to repeat the question.
You know, obviously what's been going on Wall Street is unconscionable. I have some observations I'm going to talk about in my summary remarks about that. I've observed Wall Street over the last 20 years, mostly as somebody that's been working with Wall Street, not somebody that worked on Wall Street. And I think some of the behaviors are actually structural, and they've been driven structurally. I'll talk about that in my closing remarks. But I think fundamentally we have to address those structures in Wall Street. We have to create the right incentives to do the right things. I think there's plans in place to do that. And you can raise the question marks because I'm not going to address either president's economic plan to do that if you'd like to.
Do you wish that I rephrase the question and ask it again?
The second part of the question was not answered.
Yeah. And which presidential candidate's economic plan is better targeted at turning our economy around, and why? Mr. Alley?
Yeah, I think the bottom line is I don't really know from what I've seen so far. I'm not really enthusiastic about either of them right now from what they've presented so far. I'm going to talk about some of this in my summary statements, and then you can judge based on what I say, at least what I think, and you're electing me to be the treasurer. I'm not a proxy for one of the presidential candidates.
Senator Westlund, a 45-second response if you wish.
Thank you, and I do appreciate the question. I think it's an important question. Any plan has to be more concerned with Main Street rather than Wall Street. And any plan, any proposal should have the right priorities like accountability and fairness. I believe the key elements missing from the Bush administration's plan our oversight and accountability, general accounting office oversight, limits on CEO golden parachutes and outrageous payments when leaving a company, and it doesn't have any real hope for homeowners.
Senator Westlund, what is your assessment of the size of the state's rainy day fund? And why has what would appear to be a good management practice, having a savings account for when the economy deteriorates, become a bitter partisan issue in the legislature?
Little history. The 90s, greatest economy in the history of the planet, with a tax structure that's too responsive during good times. Oregon's general fund revenue grew 100%. It doubled from $5 billion to $10 billion. Of that $5 billion growth, we, the citizens, myself included, and most every one of us in this room, through our vaunted and valued initiative system, and don't anyone walk out of here saying I'm saying do away with the initiative system. I am not. Through that period of time, through those initiatives, 5, 11, 44, 47/50, 66, 99, we spent $4.3 billion of that $5 billion growth before it ever got to that building in Salem, most of it constitutionally dedicated. And then we entered the worst recession in this state's history.
I will repeat the question. What is your assessment of the state's rainy day fund? And why what appeared to be a good management practice, having a savings account for when the economy deteriorates, become a bitter partisan issue in the legislature?
To continue, thank you for your questions. So we spent almost all the money in the greatest economy in the history of the planet. And then we entered the worst recession in this state's history, where Oregon's revenues fell further and faster than any state in the nation. Everyone went through this. Washington's fell 5, Idaho's 7, California's general fund revenues fell 9. Oregon's fell 23%. Put most businesses out of business. So it's difficult to save when all the money's being spent. Our current rainy day fund is inadequate. It should be 10% of prior biennial expenditures. It should be at least $1.5 billion.
Mr. Alley, you have the opportunity to respond.
When I was in the governor's office, one of my biggest observations, I used to tease them about this, is I said, you guys run this place like a lemonade stand. And the reason I used to say that is there's just simply no cash. It's cash in and cash out. And I think a prudent rainy day fund would actually be substantially more than what Senator Westlund said. I think it would be about a year's worth of expenditures, and that's $7.5 billion. Now, before you think that's ridiculous, the PERS fund itself is actually a rainy day fund. It's actually a reserve, and we've built that reserve to $60 billion or so. So if we can build a reserve just for our pension liabilities of $60 billion, I don't know why we shouldn't build a reserve of about $7.5 billion for the liabilities of the state.
This question for Mr. Alley. Oregon has an investment portfolio that exceeds $75 billion, larger than 21 other states and 40th largest in the world. Who actually controls that portfolio, and how, if at all, would you influence the management of those assets?
The portfolio is largely determined by the staff. The staff of the Treasurer's office selects the different funds that we're going to work with. Those recommendations go to the Oregon Investment Council or other councils. I think what you quoted is actually greater than just the PERS funds. And then the council says yes or no on the allocations that they do. One of the things that I've noticed, and in fact in talking with people, is the council has never actually said no. The council has varied the amount, but the council has actually never said no. So if the council's never said no, what it really means is the staff, therefore the treasurer and the staff, really control those investments. So I think it's critically important that we have a treasurer that understands the investment portfolio and can work with the staff and be value added with the staff, since that's really the group that controls these investments.
Senator Westlund, you have the opportunity to respond.
Thank you. To answer the question, the OIC, Oregon Investment Council, sets the policy of asset allocation and goals to be achieved by the corpus of the fund. The treasurer is one of 5 voting members on the Oregon Investment Council. They set asset allocation, what amounts in global equities, U.S. equities, bond funds, treasuries, cash, and then they direct the staff to achieve that asset allocation and goals. The OIC is the policy board. The staff does the due diligence to make the right investments in that asset class allocation. It's worked incredibly well. As we all are in this room today, Oregon has the best funded retirement system in the country, period. They're a treasure.
This question goes to Senator Westlund. As a former co-chair of the Legislative Ways and Means Committee, you are well aware that Oregon forgoes hundreds of millions of dollars of income every year because of tax expenditures, basically reductions or abatements of taxes for business or individual taxpayers that would otherwise be paid to the state. What are the most egregious of these tax expenditures in your view, and what did you do as a state senator to eliminate them?
Excellent question. That is exactly right. We call them a tax expenditure because they are expenditures we are making through tax policy. There are several very good ones, the largest of which, about 55%, is our home ownership deduction. But there are things like trout farms, rose bed growing, some nursery. You know, we've got about 900 of these things, some very large, some minuscule. What I have proposed is a biannual review of the effectiveness of these tax expenditures and are they achieving the goals that we want them to achieve. The BETC, Business Energy Tax Credit, is a tax expenditure and it's achieving its goals wonderfully in reducing our carbon footprint and producing clean energy. But there are some that are inappropriate.
Mr. Alley, you have the option for a 45-second response.
I don't have visibility on all of the tax credits or tax expenditures that Senator Westlund has. I can talk philosophically about it, and I generally speaking don't like them. I think it obfuscates where the money's actually going, meaning it obscures where the money's going. What I'd rather have us do is put the proposals on the table, vote up or vote down, whether it's worth funding that or not. I think doing a tax credit that, frankly, one of the reasons we can't tell you about it is it's very difficult to figure out what's in there and what isn't in there. And I think that's just fundamentally wrong. So what I would tend to do is reduce them as much as possible, try to put them in as line items in the budget, and have up-down votes on each of them.
This question for Mr. Alley. Oregon's bond ratings have recently been upgraded, presumably based on the legislature's creation of a modest rainy day fund in 2007. Average Oregonians probably don't care much about our bond rating or the percentage of the state's budget that's reserved in a rainy day fund. Why should they?
Well, the bond rating, if we have a higher bond rating, our interest payments are lower. If our interest payments are lower, the amount of money from the general fund required to make those payments is less. Therefore, it can be used for other purposes. So bond rating does touch every single person here. I think the bond rating did go up because of the creation of the rainy day fund, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so adamant that we have to have larger reserves. It's pretty simple. It's just like a loan. Your ability to pay will improve your rating, and your ability to pay can either be more money flowing in or a greater reserve that you have.
Senator Westlund, a response if you wish.
Thank you. That's an incredibly important question. And look, our bond rating is critical to Oregon because a good bond rating, the better the bond rating, that allows us to invest more money in schools, renewable energy, healthcare, and save taxpayers' dollars. You know, in the legislature, I helped create the School Stability Fund. I've long advocated for a more fair and stable tax structure. I've worked with the governor and the legislature to promote sound fiscal management. This is a critical role that the treasurer must play. And it's legislative policy that will help improve our bond rating.
This question for Senator Westlund. Oregon State Treasurer is a member of the State Land Board, along with the Governor and Secretary of State. The board is responsible for managing public lands in Oregon to obtain the, and I quote, greatest benefit for the people, unquote, consistent with resource conservation. What does the greatest benefit for the people mean to you, and how will your interpretation drive decisions about managing the state's public lands?
Second only to our citizens' ingenuity and initiative is Oregon's unique sense of place. The Land Board has a constitutional responsibility to manage our natural resources for the long-term sustainable benefit for our school children. As an Oregonian from the east side of the Cascades and a former agricultural business owner, I'll bring a rural perspective to the Land Board and promote sustainable practices, balancing the needs of ranchers and farmers while still protecting special places like the Metolius River Basin.
Mr. Alley, a response, if you wish.
I think historically the debate has been around, let me talk about forest lands, harvest and habitat, and the tug of war that we've had there. One of the things that has been realized is that our forests are probably the greatest opportunity to alter our carbon footprint of any asset that we have in North America. And I don't think we've really paid attention to managing those forests, the state forests, or even greater than that, the federal forests, to do an effective job of managing CO2, and that's having them healthy, growing, have air circulating through them. So as a member of the Land Board, I would broaden the discussion from just habitat versus harvest to also include CO2 and what we can do about CO2 and how those can be an asset to reduce CO2.
During this portion of the program, each candidate will ask 3 questions of the other. Questions must be asked within 30 seconds. The opposing candidate will have 1 minute to respond, after which the questioner will have the option of a 30-second rebuttal. We will alternate between the candidates, and we will begin with Senator Westlund. Senator Westlund, your question of Mr. Alley.
Thank you. Mr. Alley, what are the 2 biggest impediments that Oregon has to improving our bond rating?
I think the 2 largest impediments are lack of stable resources. That's got to be number 1. That if we had larger reserves, we would be able to improve that rating. I think the second thing is a growing and healthy and vibrant economy. That if we have jobs and if we're creating jobs and where our economy is continuously expanding, that also would improve our bond rating because it would give us more stable income streams.
Senator Westlund, you may wish to respond if you so desire.
Thank you. I have concerns over that answer because Mr. Alley has indicated he's not in favor of a consumption tax. And these are not my opinions. These are the opinions of the bond underwriters that actually do the rating and grading. Their first is our lack of a consumption tax in our revenue stream. I mean, like I said, Oregon has the most volatile revenue stream in America, and we pay about 50 to 75 basis points higher for that cost of money.
Mr. Alley, your first question of Senator Westlund.
Senator Westlund, when we got together in the Willamette Week interview and then also today in front of these folks, you said that job 1 is to produce returns for PERS. From that, all else flows. You also said in the Willamette Week interview, and I quote, if the people of Oregon were hiring somebody for the investment division, I'd go with Allen. That that seems to be somewhat at odds with your candidacy. Can you explain that for us?
What I said was, and I've said this frequently as a compliment to my opponent, if the people of Oregon were hiring someone for the investment division, just the investment division, they should hire Alan. If they're hiring someone for treasurer that's responsible for setting the policy on the OIC, sitting on the land board, overseeing the 529 college savings plan, and affecting public policy change in the legislature, they should hire me.
Mr. Alley, your rebuttal.
I think we've clearly defined that the job one, to use Senator Westlund's words, is PERS, and with it being a $60 billion plus asset that's lost $6 billion in the last year, $6 billion is $750,000 an hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a year. The most important job is of the fiduciary of the fund, and I think I'm the best qualified to do that.
Senator Westlund, your question of Mr. Alley.
Thank you. Do you believe the state should play a role in financing the tremendous capital needs of Oregon State's public schools? And if so, what type of financing program would you advocate for?
I think we do finance Oregon's public schools. In fact, I think, is this for capital that you're talking about? Capital. Sure. The best way to do that is through bond offerings, offering bonds. We've done quite a bit of it. In fact, I think the total state bonds outstanding right now are about $11.2 billion or so. And I think it's an appropriate use of funds to have bonds to do that.
Senator Westlund, do you wish to respond?
Yes, as just part of my legislative career, I helped create the school bond guarantee program so schools can use the state's credit rating to lower their borrowing costs, therefore putting more dollars into the classroom. But as your state treasurer, I will advocate for the issuance of general obligation bonds as a match to local school district bonds to provide the capital our schools so desperately need.
Mr. Alley, your next question.
On the campaign trail, one of the most interesting series of questions I received were from some high school students. And they're completely different than what we've been talking about. And I thought I'd use one of those questions here today. And they asked, if you were an animal for 1 week, what animal would you be? And then you return to this animal, but
well, in the technical sense of the word, we are mammals, a species of animal. I kind of like where I am, but I'll guarantee you, if I could be an animal for a day, yesterday I would have been a beaver.
Mr. Alley, your rebuttal if you choose.
nice. That's why I wore the closest thing to an orange tie today. You know, actually, I thought about this. I would be something at the other end of the food chain. I'd be an insect or a phytoplankton or something, because I think we don't fully understand the impact of what we're doing to our environment from our perspective at the top of the food chain. I would actually go out and I would be something small for a week or so to really understand the effects of biodiversity and climate change.
Senator Westlund, your next question of Mr. Alley.
Thank you. Of course, on Civil War Day, I'd probably be a duck, but that, you know. Recently, the State Land Board has had to deal with a very contentious, time-consuming issue regarding the John Day River and Rogue with regard to navigability. Alan, what changes, if any, would you make in the current laws governing navigability and determination use?
I don't know that I would make any changes in the laws. I've been perplexed and actually talked to several people about this, about why at this time we seem to be, I would say, exercising the state's rights when for 150 years we haven't in many of these cases. I had an example in Coos Bay where they're trying to build a museum in Coos Bay, and it's built on dredgings. And the folks in Coos Bay, if you know those folks, they're great folks. And they got caught buying the land from the county, and then the state came in and said, geez, I'm sorry, but that's really state land, and now you have to buy the land from us again. And this is to build a maritime museum in Coos Bay. So I don't know that I would change any of the laws. What I would do is I'd really look at how we're enforcing those laws and make sure that we're doing it for the common good of the citizens of Oregon.
Mr. Westlund, do you wish to respond?
Thank you. This is an incredibly contentious, as we all know, issue, as we all know. It consumes too much time of the Department of State Lands and the Land Board. The Supreme Court established the Public Use Doctrine Act in 1936. I support the Public Use Doctrine. But our time and consideration on a river by river by river by river.
And now for the last question, Mr. Alley, your next question and last question for Senator Westlund.
Senator Westlund, I was in an interview the other day, and it wasn't one where we were together, so this is secondhand. If it's wrong, please correct me. But they mentioned that you had been talking to them about how you had managed billions and billions of dollars in your time in the legislature, and I had managed millions of dollars or something to that effect in my time as a corporate executive. Can you elaborate on that for us, if that's true?
Well, as co-chair of the Budget Writing Ways and Means Committee, I have shepherded Oregon through some of her best times and without question, her worst times. As I alluded to earlier, during the 5 not-so-special sessions of '02, Oregon's revenues fell further and faster than any state in the nation, 22%. When you're in that type of leadership position, managing not just the dollars, but the policies they represent, the impact on real Oregonians with real problems. I mean, we shortened the already shortest school year in the nation. We wheeled little old ladies out of nursing homes, threw 75,000 human beings off the Oregon Health Plan, and let prisoners out of jail. When you're the executive in charge of making those decisions and recommendations and managing the votes to get it, that's the best executive experience there is.
Mr. Alley, your response.
And when I heard this, I thought about it, and what I realized, and it's also reinforced in my time in the governor's office, is that all of our time in government is spent worrying about spending. How do we spend money? How do we allocate the spending, not creating? And it's so much harder to create than to spend. And in business, you spend your time creating dollars, creating that money that we spend in government.
We will now move to the final portion of the program, 3-minute closing statements from each candidate. We will begin with Senator Westlund.
Thank you. As your next state treasurer, I will be one of the voices for Oregonians facing hard times. They need all of our help now. This is all about the economy, not in the abstract, but in the here and now, and how it is affecting people, real Oregonians, our neighbors. People concerned about keeping what they have or can't attain. The waitress whose tips aren't coming in as much, so she can't afford the gas to drive to work. Students or displaced workers who can't afford to go to college. The senior seeing a larger and larger portion of their fixed income going to medicine. Parents who have to work 2 jobs and don't have time to help their child with their homework. The role of government is to play a positive and proactive role in people's lives. I will provide that role. I will invest in quality education. I will lower healthcare costs. I will put financial literacy in schools so our students can have better access to the financial tools when they graduate. You know, what this is really all about for me is on the first day, the morning that I was to be sworn in for the first time in the Oregon House of Representatives, I was sleeping in my apartment with my family, literally camped out in sleeping bags on the floor of our apartment. And as most Oregon families, when we got up, we were cramped, crowded, frustrated. I certainly the most. And I'm pushing them out the door. Come on, come on. We got to go raise our hand. We got to go raise our hand. My then 4-year-old daughter, Taylor, knew something was up. Clothes were going into the closet, ties. She knew that Daddy wasn't quite coming home as much. So as we're going out that door, I've been out so many times since. Pushed, come on, come on. She looked up at me, and as only a 4-year-old could, asked, Daddy, what are you going to do as an 8 representative? What are you going to do as a state representative? I knew that was an important question, even in my hurriedness. So I knelt down, put my hand on a little shoulder. I said, honey, Daddy's going to help the school children learn to read. I'm going to help the sick people get well. I'm going to throw the bad guys in jail, and I'm going to help people as old as Grandma live out their lives in comfort. She beams a great big, okay, Daddy. You know, to this day, that's the best answer I've ever given as to why I value public service. I'd appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Now for Mr. Alley.
I thought I'd talk a little bit about global financial markets. I think you're all interested in that. I think it's the role of the Treasurer to provide some insights. They've grown complacently complex over the last 20 years. In fact, even with all of my experience in these markets, it's difficult for me to follow it and understand what's gone on. But since I'm an engineer and I'm curious, I need to know why. I need to understand what's the underpinnings of what's going on. When I thought about it, one of the reasons is that old-time Wall Street, since the 1930s, is based on an inefficient market model. That means that somebody has information and somebody doesn't have information. The person with the information can make a return. The person without the information is disadvantaged. And it was actually built that way over many, many years. So you had brokerage firms that provided that type of information. When an analyst would write a report, they'd courier it to their friend in New York. The reports would then be bundled and sent to the hinterlands. We'd get it in Oregon 5 days later. Our brokers would then talk to us about it. And guess what? The people in New York made the money. The people in the other places didn't. Today, information literally moves at the speed of light. We also have strict regulations governing the dissemination of that information, like Sarbanes-Oxley that I was involved with. The easy money profits from Wall Street are gone. So what happened? They started getting more and more clever about creating schemes to introduce this inefficiency back into the market that regulation and technology has removed. So what would I do? Not what the president would do. What would I do? What am I proposing? I think we have to buy those undervalued securities that are clogging the arteries out there right now, this $700 billion. The difference is these are real assets. These are homes that underlie these securities. I think we'll buy those securities, and then over time we'll auction those securities off. I think it could be at a premium to the $700 billion and actually make a return for us. The second thing is we can't reward the people that caused this to happen. We also have to take care of the victims, and we have to put structures in place to do that. And finally, we need regulatory structures on Wall Street that are similar to the regulatory structures that we put in place for corporations with Sarbanes-Oxley to prevent this from happening in the future, to hold people accountable for bad behavior, and to put the crooks in jail. In closing, I've never done this before, and it's an amazing experience. It's been a phenomenal journey. My wife, Debbie, has been my partner through the whole thing, and my staff. It's really, really been extraordinary. And I want to thank all of you and thank the citizens of Oregon for making this possible. I'm Alan Alley, candidate for State Treasurer. Thank you.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't think it gets much better than this here at City Club. I'd like to ask the people that wrote the questions, to the extent you're in the room, to stand up. People on the program committee, are you here? There's one. Because I thought they're just amazing questions. I'd like to recognize the people that did that hard work. Thank you. I also want to thank our moderator, Professor Robert Eisinger, our timekeeper, Joe Sixta, our panel of the Truth Squad, John Leeper, Leslie Moorhead, and Steve Novick. But most of all, I'd like to thank our two debaters, not only for their participation with us today in this important debate, and not only for their civility and courtesy and their focus on the issues, but ultimately for their willingness to run for high public office in Oregon. Lots of people think about it. These people are actually doing it, and I think we have a great choice, and I thank them for being here today. We'll see you next week for a debate on measures 57 and 61, and we are adjourned. Thank you.